Story number 1. The light that wouldn't die. I've always thought of myself as a practical man. Science teacher by trade. Skeptic by nature. Ghosts? Please. Haunted houses? Leave those to horror movies and Halloween attractions. At least, that's what I used to believe, until the night I encountered the light that wouldn't die. It all started with my sister Rachel. She had an old Victorian house in a sleepy New England town. The kind of place where the streets are lined with gnarled oak trees and the air smells perpetually of decaying leaves. Rachel loved that house, creaky floorboards and all. But she always said it had a weird energy. I called it charm. She called it unsettling. When she asked me to house sit while she went on a week-long trip to visit her college roommate, I didn't think twice. I could use the peace and quiet. I figured, maybe grade some papers, binge-watch a few old movies, and enjoy her massive collection of craft beers. Rachel, on the other hand, was nervous. I don't know, Will, the house has been acting off lately, she said, shoving her suitcase into the trunk of her car. Lights flickering, weird noises at night, probably just my imagination, but still, I waved her off. You're just psyching yourself out. Go, have fun. I'll keep an eye on your haunted house. She rolled her eyes but smiled. Just don't let anything weird happen, okay? The first couple of days were uneventful. I spent most of my time lounging in her overstuffed armchair, a beer in hand and my laptop balanced precariously on my knees. The house creaked and groaned like all old houses do, but nothing out of the ordinary. It wasn't until the third night that things started to get strange. It began with a lamp in the living room, an old brass table lamp with a stained glass shade, perched on a side table next to the couch. It was beautiful, in a way, but something about it made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way the roses painted on the glass seemed to shimmer even when the light was off. Or maybe it was the fact that I didn't remember turning it on. I was sure I'd left the room in darkness when I went to the kitchen for a late-night snack. But when I came back, the lamp was on, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. I frowned. Had I accidentally flipped the switch? I turned it off, watching as the light faded into darkness. Satisfied, I grabbed my bowl of popcorn and headed upstairs to bed. But when I glanced back over my shoulder, the light was on again. I stopped in my tracks, staring at the lamp. My rational brain kicked in. Faulty wiring, I told myself. Or maybe the switch was loose. Nothing to be scared of. I walked back to the lamp and turned it off again, this time holding the switch firmly until I felt the satisfying click. As I turned to leave, the light flickered back on. A shiver ran down my spine. I yanked the plug from the wall, the cord coming loose with a sharp snap. The lamp went dark. For a moment, I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. Just an old house, I muttered to myself. Old houses do weird things. I turned to leave, but the glow stopped me in my tracks. The lamp was on again. Only this time, it wasn't just a soft, golden light. It was brighter, almost blinding, the kind of light that seemed to burn straight through your eyelids. My breath caught in my throat. The lamp wasn't plugged in. That's when I heard the voice. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe the groaning of the pipes. But no, it was clearer than that. More deliberate. A whisper, low and guttural, like it was coming from the very filament inside the bulb. Stay! My blood turned to ice. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the coffee table. Hello, I called, my voice trembling. The house was silent, save for the hum of the lamp. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. I grabbed my phone and bolted upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lamp's glow, felt its light burning into me. By morning, I had convinced myself it was all a bad dream. Sleep deprivation and an overactive imagination. That's all. But the next night, it happened again. And the night after that, the lamp became a presence, a living thing, turned on and off at will. its light growing brighter and more intense with each passing hour. The whispers grew louder, no longer confined to the living room. I heard them in the kitchen, in the hallway, even in my bedroom. They spoke in fragmented sentences, words I couldn't understand but felt deep in my bones. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and something metallic. By the fifth night, I was at my breaking point. I hadn't slept in days. My hands shook as I unplugged every light in the house, shut off the breaker, and even unscrewed the bulb from the lamp. Still, the light persisted, glowing brighter than ever. It illuminated the entire house, its light seeping under doors and through cracks in the walls. And the whispers, oh God, the whispers. They weren't whispers anymore. They were screams. Get out! I ran. I didn't bother packing, didn't even grab my keys. I sprinted out the front door and into the cool night air, not stopping until I was halfway down the street. When I finally turned back, the house was dark, its windows staring back at me like hollow eyes. I never went back. Rachel came home to find the house empty, my car still parked in the driveway. She called me, frantic, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I've tried to move on, to forget what happened in that house. But every night, when I close my eyes, I see the light, and sometimes, just before I drift off to sleep, I hear the whispers. They're waiting for me, and I know one day I'll have to go back. Story number 2. Whispers in the kitchen, in the blizzard. I still remember that night with the way the shadows seemed to stretch, as if the biting cold and swirling snow had etched every detail into my memory. Our family had where the wind bites to the remote village of seeps into every crevice of your home. Within the vast expanses of Siberia, nestled in my quaint little house, seeking a simpler life away from the relentless pace warmth of the fireplace, my only companion, though small as I settled seemingly in for a quiet night of reading, held a sense of isolation. Had always been a sanctuary, comforting and unnerving, a place of peace. It was mid-January, away from the chaos, the heart of everyday life. When the storm hit with a ferocity, an unsettling feeling gnawed at the edges of my calm. The snow piled high against our brewing outside, or the isolation that magnified every thick blanket that transformed our surroundings into a monochromatic world of white. As I delved deeper into the pages of my children, Mikhail and Katya, lilting giggle, and I huddled together in the living room. It was a light, the fireplace, our only source reminiscent of warmth of childhood, the relentless cold. But out of the storm raged quiet outside of the night, the wind howling like a wounded beast, shaking the windows intently, and causing the house giggling to groan again under nature's slightly fury. Louder this time. We tried to keep our spirits emanating unmistakably from the kitchen, but the oppressive atmosphere weighed heavily on us. I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on my ears, or perhaps the storm showed no signs of abating the storm's fury. And the darkness seemed to press in from all sides, their rhythm steady, making the house feel even more claustrophobic. Searching around for rational explanations. As the wind reached its peak and the snowstorm showed summoning no mercy. Every ounce of a haunting courage. Melody pierced through the chaos to investigate. I reached for a sturdy wooden ethereal stick I kept near the front door, delicate and sorrowful, more out of habit than carried on the howling wind, and made my way cautiously towards the kitchen. We thought it was just the wind playing heavier than the last, blending with the sounds of creaking under my weight. But as the singing grew louder and more distinct, casting long, it became wavering shadows to ignore. That danced menacingly. Do you hear on that? The walls. Anna whispered. As I approached the kitchen, her voice trembling, the giggling with a mix louder, of fear and more curiosity. Distinct. Echoing off the tiled floor, pounding in my chest. Steel appliances. It's beautiful. My heart pounded in my chest. Eerie. A mix of fear and determination driving me forward. Clutched her blanket tightly. Opened the kitchen door, eyes wide with the hinges protesting. What is with a loud squeak? Papa. And shone my flashlight around the room. I replied. The kitchen was exactly as I had left it earlier, but I think we should see where it's coming from. Untouched. Anna glanced around the room. Had intensified. Worry etched on her face. The howling wind rattling the windows and causing the curtains to sway like ghostly apparitions. I have to check. There was no sign of anyone. Unable to shake the feeling that something was calling out anyone had been in the depths of the blizzard. My eyes darted around, grabbing a flashlight, searching for any clue. But I made my way to the back door, eerily silent. Anna and just the children as I was about to dismiss behind. The giggles as my imagination. Outside was a relentless the refrigerator wall, door creaked making it nearly impossible to see cold more air than a few feet with a sharp hiss. The singing seemed to emanate every muscle in my body that bordered our property. Slowly,
a vast
the
expanse
door
of trees
began to
buried
swing
under
open
thick
further,
layers of snow,
revealing the
we need to
pristine
be
interior
careful.
filled with
Anna
neatly
warned.
arranged
Her
food
grip
items.
on Kadia's
But it
hand
wasn't the
tightening.
food that caught
The
my
storm is
attention,
dangerous.
it was the knives.
And we don't
One
know
by
what's
one,
out there.
The knives
I nodded,
slid out of
trying
their
to reassure
compartments,
her as I
moving
opened the
with
door.
a precision
A
that
gust of
defied
freezing
any
wind
natural
hit me,
explanation.
nearly knocking
They were
me off
arranged
balance.
meticulously
The singing
on the
grew
kitchen
louder,
table,
its
forming
melancholy
the
tune
unmistakable
cutting through the
shape
roar
of a
of the
smile.
storm.
My breath
Shining the
caught in my
flashlight
throat
towards
as
the
I took in the
source.
sight.
I could
The
just make
knives
out the
glinting
silhouettes of
ominously
trees
under the
swaying
harsh
violently
kitchen
in the
light.
wind.
What
The
is going
snowflakes
on?
dancing
I
around us
whispered
like
to myself.
ghostly apparitions.
My voice
I
barely
think it's
audible
coming from
over
that
the
pounding
direction
of my heart,
I said.
I took a
Pointing
tentative
towards
step
the
forward.
dense forest,
My grip
we should
tightening
follow
around
it.
the wooden stick.
Anna hesitated.
The giggling had
glancing
ceased,
back at our
replaced
warm home.
by an oppressive
Are you
silence
sure?
that pressed
It might
in
be
on me
unsafe.
from all sides.
But the
I
singing
reached
was
out,
insistent,
my hand
pulling me
trembling,
forward
and
like a
picked up
beacon
one
in
of
the
the
darkness.
darkness.
Its
We
cold
won't
metal
go far.
sent a shiver down my
Promised.
spine,
Taking
the
a
blade
step
sharp
into the
and
storm,
unforgiving.
the cold bit
As I
into
held
my
it,
skin.
the room
And the
seemed
wind
to grow
whipped
colder,
around us,
the air
making
thick
each
with an
step a
unspoken
struggle
tension.
against
My
nature's
mind
wrath.
raced as we
Trying to
ventured
make
deeper
sense
into
of
the
the
woods.
inexplicable
The
events
singing enveloped
unfolding
us,
before me,
growing
Suddenly,
clearer and more
the lights
enchanting.
flickered.
It was
Plunging
as if
the
the
kitchen
spectral
into
voice
darkness
was guiding
before
us,
snapping back
leading
to
us
full
towards
brightness.
something
I
unseen.
dropped the knife.
The footprints
Scrambling
we left
to
behind
regain
were
my
quickly
composure,
covered by the
but
relentless
as I did,
snowfall.
the refrigerator
Erasing any
door
trace
slammed
of our
shut
passage.
with a force that made
After
the
what
entire
felt
room
like
tremble.
hours,
I
we
backed
reached
away,
a small
my
clearing
eyes
illuminated
illuminated
by
terror,
the pale light
searching
of the moon
for any
struggling
sign
through
of
the
movement.
movement.
In the
That's when
center
I saw
stood
it.
an old,
A shadowy
abandoned
figure
cabin,
standing in the
its
corner
wooden
of the
structure
kitchen,
battered by
its form
years of
indistinct
neglect and the
blurred,
unforgiving Siberian
as if it
winters.
were made of smoke
The singing
and
seemed
darkness.
to emanate
My breath
directly
caught
from
in my
within,
throat,
drawing
and I
us
felt a
closer
surge of panic
as the
sense
figure
of
began
unease
to move
settling
towards
in our
me.
hearts.
His presence
Should we
growing
go
more
in?
tangible
Anna
with each
whispered.
step.
Her
Who
eyes
are
darting
you?
between
I
me and the
demanded.
cabin.
My voice
I took a deep
cracking
breath,
under the weight
the
of
cold
fear.
air filling
The
my
figure
lungs.
stopped.
We have
His
to.
hollow eyes fixed
It's like
on
the
mine.
singing is
A
calling
silent
out to
scream
us.
etched
We
into its
approached the
ethereal
cabin
face.
cautiously.
Without
The
warning,
door creaking
it lunged
ominously
forward,
as I pushed it open.
passing through me
The
like a
interior
gust
was
of
dark
wind,
and musty,
leaving me
the
shaken
remnants
and
of a bygone
disoriented.
era
I
scattered
staggered
throughout the
back,
room,
clutching
broken
my chest,
furniture,
the
tattered
fear
curtains,
overwhelming me
and
as
the
I
faint
struggled
scent
to
of
process
decay
what had
hanging
just
in the
happened.
air. The
Desperate
singing
to
echoed
escape,
through the empty
I turned
space,
and ran out of
guiding
the
us
kitchen,
towards the back
slamming
of the
the
cabin.
door shut
In
behind
the corner
me.
of the
I
room
leaned
stood an
against
old,
it, trying to
dust-covered
steady
radio,
my breathing.
its antenna
But the
barely
adrenaline
visible
coursing
beneath
through my
layers
veins
of grime.
left me feeling
The radio
lightheaded
crackled
and weak.
to life as
the
we
house
approached.
felt colder now.
The ghostly
the
voice
shadows
continuing
deeper
its
and more
mournful
menacing,
tune,
as
but
there
if
was
the very
something
walls
more.
were closing in
A
on
voice
me.
overlaying
I knew
the
I
singing,
couldn't stay there,
soft and
I grabbed my
sorrowful,
coat and
telling
hurried
a tale
upstairs
of
to the
loss
guest
and
bedroom,
longing.
the only
Please,
other room
help
in the
me.
house.
Hoping
The
to
voice
find
whispered,
safety and
sending
perhaps
a shiver
some
down
semblance
my
of peace.
spine. As I
can't
climbed
move
the
on.
stairs, Anna
The sound
clutched
of
our children
footsteps
closer
echoed from below,
her face pale,
a soft,
"What do we
rhythmic
do?"
tapping
I
that
glanced
seemed to follow
around,
my every move,
searching for any
reaching
clues.
the bedroom.
We need to find out who
the door
she is
behind
and
me,
why she's here.
My hands shaking
Maybe we
as
can
I
help
tried
her
to
find
calm my
peace.
racing heart.
As we
I
explored
sat
the cabin,
on the edge of the bed.
we found old
pulling the
photographs
covers
scattered
tightly
across
around
a dusty
me,
table,
eyes darting
images
around
of
the
a
room
woman
for
and
any
her
sign
children,
of movement.
smiling
The
and
giggling
happy,
had returned,
starkly contrasting
this time louder
the desolate
and more
state
insistent,
of the cabin now.
reverberating
One
through the
photograph,
walls like a
in
haunting
particular,
melody.
caught
I
my
reached
eye,
for my phone,
a family portrait
hands
taken
trembling,
just last Christmas,
and dialed my best
the year
friend,
before we moved
Sarah,
here,
hoping
it was
for
the
some
same house,
reassurance.
the same
My finger
surroundings,
hovered over the
but
call
the faces
button
in
as
the
I
picture
debated
were
whether
different,
to answer,
full of
fearing
life
that
and
the
joy.
night's events were
These
too
must
surreal
be
to share
hers.
with anyone.
I murmured,
Finally,
showing the
I
photo
pressed
to
the
Anna.
button,
She
waiting
lost her
anxiously
family here.
for her to pick
Didn't
up.
she? Hello.
Anna nodded.
I whispered,
tears welling
my voice
up in her
barely
eyes.
audible.
We need
Hey,
to help her.
Eli,
Determined
what's
to
up?
bring peace
Sarah's
to the
cheerful
restless
voice
spirit,
was a stark
we decided to
contrast to the
perform
fear
a small
gripping me.
ceremony.
I
Lighting
need to
candles
talk
and
to you.
saying prayers
Something
for her
strange
and her
is
children.
happening here.
As we finished,
I stammered.
the singing
My mind
began
struggling
to
change,
find the right
shifting swung from sorrowful
Calm
to
down.
hopeful.
Eli,
The melody
what do you
becoming
mean?
lighter and
She
more
asked.
serene.
The
Concern
air grew
evident
warmer.
in her tone.
The oppressive
I took a
tension
deep
lifted,
breath, as if a
trying
weight
to
had
steady
been lifted
myself.
from the room. I heard
Suddenly,
giggling.
the
And
radio
then I
fell
saw
silent,
a shadowy figure
and a
in the
gentle
kitchen.
breeze swept
Knives
through the
were
cabin,
arranged in a smile,
stirring the candles
and now I feel
carrying
like
with it
something
a sense of
watching me.
calm.
There
We
was a
felt
moment of
presence
silence
beside
on the
us,
other end of the
a
line
comforting
before
warmth
Sarah
that
spoke
reassured
again.
us we had
Eli,
done the right thing.
maybe you should call
the
the
shadowy
police.
figure that
It
had
sounds
haunted
like
our
someone
steps
broke
was
in.
now gone.
But the house
replaced
was locked,
by a peaceful
and I saw
stillness
nothing
that filled the
outside.
space.
It was like
As we
something
left the cabin,
or someone
the
was
storm
inside.
had subsided.
I explained,
the snow now
my voice
falling
cracking.
gently.
creating a serene
I'm on my
blanket over the
Stay
land.
in the bedroom
The
and lock
footprints
the
we had
door.
followed were now covered,
She instructed firmly.
erased by the
I nodded,
tranquil snowfall,
even though she couldn't
leaving
see
no
me,
trace of
and
the night's
stayed as
eerie
still
events.
as possible.
Back at home,
listening to
we
the
huddled
sounds of the
together,
storm outside,
the memory
and the
of the
eerie
night
giggling
lingering
that seemed
but
to
tempered
dance
by
just
the sense
beyond
of
the walls.
accomplishment and
Minutes
peace
felt
we had
like
brought
hours
to the lost
as I waited
spirit.
for Sarah's
The
arrival.
singing had faded,
The fear gnawing at me
replaced by the
relentlessly.
comforting sounds
Finally,
of a quiet winter
the sound
night.
of footsteps
And the
echoed
oppressive
from
fear
downstairs,
that had gripped us had
and
been
Sarah's
replaced
voice
by a
called out,
newfound sense of
"Eli,
resilience
are
and
you
hope.
okay?"
Years
I
have
let out
passed
a shaky
since that
breath,
fateful night
relief
in Murney,
washing over
but the
me.
memory remains.
Yeah, Sarah,
A haunting
I heard
reminder
something
of the
too.
thin veil
Come
that
quick.
separates our world
She
from the
arrived
unknown,
within minutes,
and the enduring
her
power
presence
of
bringing a
compassion
sense
in
of
the face
safety
of sorrow.
and comfort.
Sometimes,
We cautiously
when
made
the wind
our way
howls
downstairs,
just right and the
the
snow
house
begins
feeling
to fall,
colder and more
I catch a
oppressive
glimpse
with
of a
each step.
shadow in the
The
corner
kitchen
of my
was
eye.
empty, a
No
silent
sign
guardian
of anyone
watching over
or anything out of place,
ensuring that the
except
spirits
for the
of the
lingering
past
chill
are never
that seemed to
forgotten.
hang in the air.
If you ever find
Did you
yourself
see anything
alone
in the dead of
Sarah
winter?
asked. Listen
Her
to the
eyes
whispers
scanning
of the
the
storm
room for
and
any
heed the
clue.
calls of
I shook
those
my
who
head,
cannot move on.
still trembling.
Respect the memories
but
that
the
linger
refrigerator
in
door
forgotten
was
corners.
open, and
Honor
the
the
knives
spirits
were
that
arranged
seek
in a
peace.
smile.
And
Then,
remember that
there was
even
that
in the
shadowy
harshest of
figure.
winters,
Sarah
there
looked
is
at me
warmth in
thoughtfully.
compassion and
Maybe
light
it's just
in
the wind
understanding.
messing with you.
Stay safe,
or something else
cherish
in
your
the
loved
house
ones,
reacting to the
and
storm.
may your winters
Let's
be
check
filled
all
with
the
warmth,
windows and doors
love,
again.
and the
Just to be
enduring
sure.
spirit of peace.
We
moved through the house, double-checking every window and door, but everything seemed secure. The storm had passed, leaving behind a blanket of snow and an unsettling silence. As we stood in the kitchen, the memories of the night before felt like a distant nightmare, but the fear still lingered in the air. "Let's stay here for a while," Sarah suggested, sitting down at the kitchen table. "If anything happens, we can call the police." I nodded, still unable to fully shake the feeling of being watched. The room felt colder now, the shadows deeper, as if the house itself was holding its breath. We sat in tense silence, the only sound the faint crackling of the fireplace and the distant howl of the wind outside. Hours passed without incident, the fear gradually subsiding as exhaustion took hold. I decided to try and sleep, pulling the covers tightly around me. But the memory of the shadowy figure and the eerie arrangement of knives kept my mind restless. As I drifted into a restless sleep, the house seemed to exhale, the oppressive tension lifting slightly, leaving behind a sense of uneasy calm. The next morning, as the sun began to rise and the storm faded into a distant memory, I woke to find the kitchen door slightly ajar. My heart raced as I approached, the fear from the night before still gnawing at me. Peering inside, I saw that the refrigerator door was closed, but on the kitchen table lay another note, neatly folded and placed at the center of the knife arrangement. With trembling hands, I picked it up and unfolded the paper, reading the chilling message, "Thank you for noticing me." A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized the presence that haunted my home was no longer a source of fear, but a lingering reminder of something far more sinister. The knives had vanished, leaving the table spotless except for the note. The giggling was gone, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to hum with unspoken intent. I looked around the kitchen, the air thick with an unspoken tension. "Sarah," I called softly, waking her from her light sleep. "We need to talk." She stirred, rubbing her eyes. "What is it?" "I think there's something here, something beyond our understanding." The note, it says, "Thank you for noticing me." What does that even mean? Sarah sat up, her expression serious. "Maybe we should move out. Eli, if this place is haunted, it might not be safe for us to stay." I nodded slowly, the reality of our situation sinking in. "You're probably right. Let's start making arrangements." We spent the day packing our belongings, the atmosphere heavy with an unspoken fear. As we prepared to leave, I took one last look around the house. The memories of that night etched into my mind. The house stood silent and foreboding, the shadows no longer just a source of fear, but a reminder of the unresolved mysteries that lingered within its walls. As we drove away, the house receded into the distance, the snow-covered landscape a stark contrast to the turmoil we felt inside. I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror,
half expecting to see the shadowy figure watching us. But there was nothing, just the empty road stretching out before us. Years have passed since that harrowing night, but the memory remains, a haunting echo that serves as a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the unknown. Sometimes, when the wind howls just right or the snow begins to fall, I catch a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of my eye, a silent reminder that some spirits linger, seeking acknowledgement and closure. If you ever find yourself alone in a house during the cold winter nights, remember my story. Respect the boundaries between the living and the dead. Honor the memories that linger in forgotten corners, and be mindful of the whispers that echo through the shadows. For in the heart of darkness, not all noises are mere coincidences, and some echoes of the past wait patiently to be heard by those who dare to listen. Stay safe, cherish your loved ones, and may your nights be filled with warmth, love, and the enduring spirit of peace. Story number 3. The unstoppable light. I still remember that night with unsettling clarity. The way the shadows seemed to stretch and the chill that crept into every corner of our old house. It was late December, the kind of winter night where the cold bites through layers of clothing and the wind howls like a restless spirit outside my window. I was home alone, my parents out for the evening, leaving me to the solitude of our spacious yet aging house. It was the perfect setting for a quiet evening in. Yet little did I know, it would become the stage for a nightmare I'd never forget. The living room was my sanctuary, a place where I could unwind after long days at work. The fireplace crackled softly, casting a warm glow that danced across the room, highlighting the familiar furniture and the ornate decorations we'd put up for the holidays. Among these decorations was an old lamp on the side table, a family heirloom that added a touch of vintage charm to the space. Its warm light was both comforting and nostalgic, reminding me of simpler times. As I settled onto the plush sofa with a book, the house felt serene, the perfect blend of peace and warmth against the cold night outside. I glanced over at the lamp, appreciating its steady, comforting glow. But as the night deepened, an unsettling feeling began to gnaw at me, a sense that something wasn't quite right. Around midnight, as the house settled into an almost eerie silence, I heard it, a soft click and the unmistakable sound of the lamp turning on by itself. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced around, half expecting to see a family member or someone I knew standing nearby. But the room was empty, save for me and the flickering fire. Shrugging it off as a simple electrical glitch, I reached over to turn off the lamp, dismissing the thought as mere paranoia brought on by the solitude. I did just that, the lamp's light extinguishing with a soft thud. Relieved, I returned to my book, the pages fluttering gently in the draft from the slightly open window. But just as quickly as it had gone out, the lamp turned back on, its light piercing the darkness of the room. My pulse quickened, a knot forming in my stomach as I stared at the lamp in disbelief. This can't be happening, I muttered to myself, my mind racing to find a logical explanation. I rose from the sofa, the cold air of the room making me shiver despite the warm glow of the lamp. I approached the lamp cautiously, reaching out to switch it off once more. But as my fingers touched the switch, the lamp refused to budge, the electrical current seemingly defying my attempts to control it. Panic began to set in. I checked the lamp's plug, ensuring it was securely connected to the outlet. But everything appeared normal. There were no loose wires, no signs of wear or damage. The lamp was as it had always been, a source of steady, comforting light in our home. Yet, here it was, stubbornly refusing to stay off. Determined to put an end to the unsettling occurrence, I decided to take a more drastic measure. Grabbing the circuit breaker from the basement, I made my way down the creaky stairs, the lamp's relentless glow guiding my path. The basement was a dim, cluttered space filled with old boxes and forgotten memories, but I navigated it with purpose. My mind focused on silencing the lamp once and for all. Reaching the breaker box, I flipped the main switch, cutting power to the entire house. The lights flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. I stood there for a moment, the silence deafening, the cold air wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. Relief washed over me as I realized the lamp was no longer lit, but a lingering sense of dread kept me rooted to the spot. I turned to leave the basement, the oppressive atmosphere pressing in on me from all sides. But just as I reached for the door, I heard it, the lamp's light, glowing fiercely from the living room, despite the power being cut. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that the lamp was still shining, its light emanating from an unknown source, unaffected by the circuit breaker. Fear propelled me to flee, and I raced up the stairs, the sound of the lamp's light intensifying behind me. Bursting into the living room, I found it as I'd left it, dim and empty, yet the lamp's light burned brightly, its presence inexplicable and unnerving. I looked around frantically, searching for any sign of what could be causing this phenomenon. But the room was as empty as before. Desperate and terrified, I grabbed my coat and fled the house, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil within me. The snow swirled around me as I ran, the cold biting into my skin. But I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my car parked in the driveway. The lamp's light still burned within the house, a silent sentinel that refused to be silenced. The next morning, shaken and sleep-deprived, I returned to the house to assess the damage and seek answers. The storm had subsided, leaving behind a serene blanket of snow and an air of lingering mystery. I approached the living room cautiously, the memory of the previous night's events haunting my every step. The lamp was still lit, its light no longer aggressive but steady and unnerving. I searched the house for any signs of tampering or malfunction, but found nothing out of the ordinary. The lamp remained the same, its light unwavering despite the lack of power. Determined to understand what had happened, I delved into the house's history, speaking with neighbors and scouring old records. What I discovered was a tragic tale from many years ago. A woman had lived in the house alone, just as I did, and one fateful night, she had perished in a mysterious accident. The circumstances were unclear, but rumors whispered of a supernatural presence that lingered, unable to move on from her untimely death. It was said that her spirit had found a way to remain, using the lamp as a beacon to keep her presence felt within the walls of the house. The more I learned, the more it made sense. The lamp wasn't just a piece of decor. It was a conduit for something beyond my understanding, a lingering spirit that couldn't let go. The fact that it refused to be turned off, even when the power was cut, was a testament to its supernatural origin. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to perform a ritual of closure, hoping to help the restless spirit find peace and release her from the confines of the house. I gathered candles, incense, and a few personal items that held significance to her memory, creating a small shrine in the living room as a gesture of respect and remembrance. That night, I sat in the living room, the shrine before me, and began to speak words of comfort and understanding. I acknowledged her presence, honoring her memory, and expressing my desire to help her find peace. The air grew colder, the shadows deepening as if the house itself was responding to my efforts. As I finished the ritual, the lamp began to dim, its light slowly fading until it was no longer visible. A sense of calm washed over me, the oppressive fear lifted, replaced by a serene stillness that filled the room. I felt a gentle warmth, as if the spirit had finally found the closure she had been seeking. The following morning, the lamp was completely dark, its light extinguished as if it had never been lit. The house felt peaceful, the lingering presence of the spirit now at rest. I knew that I had played a part in helping her move on, and in doing so, had also found a sense of closure for myself. Years have passed since that chilling December night, but the memory remains, a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. Sometimes, when the winter winds howl just right and the snow begins to fall, I catch a glimpse of a flickering light in the corner of my eye, a silent testament to the night when the lamp refused to be silenced and a restless spirit found peace. If you ever find yourself home alone during the cold winter months, remember our story. Respect the memories that linger in forgotten corners. Honor the spirits that seek peace. And be mindful of the signs that something beyond our understanding might be trying to communicate. For in the heart of winter, not all lights are meant to be extinguished, and some echoes of the past continue to watch and wait, seeking acknowledgement and closure. Stay safe, cherish your loved ones, and may your homes be filled with warmth, love, and the enduring spirit of peace. Story number 4. Whispers behind the door. I still remember that night with unnerving clarity. The way the shadows seemed to stretch and the silence pressed in on me from all sides. It was a chilly December evening in my modest home on the outskirts of town, a place I had chosen for its solitude and tranquility. As a freelance writer, I valued the peace it provided, allowing me to immerse myself in my work without the constant hum of city life intruding. Little did I know, this very peace would soon be shattered by an experience that would haunt me for years to come. It was around 2 a.m., the dead of night, when I was jolted awake by a persistent knocking sound. First, I thought it might have been the wind playing tricks on the old house, causing the branches outside to scrape against the windows. But as the knocking continued, growing louder and more insistent, I knew something was wrong. My heart raced as I sat up, the adrenaline surging through my veins. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. 2:03 a.m. The knocking seemed to echo through the quiet house, a rhythmic pattern that felt almost deliberate. I reached for my phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing my sister's number. But before I could hit call, the knocking intensified, each strike more forceful than the last, reverberating through the walls like a relentless drumbeat. "Mom? Dad?" I whispered into the phone, my voice barely audible over the pounding at the door. No answer. Only the unyielding sound of knocking met my ears. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Rational thought battled with the creeping dread that threatened to consume me. Maybe it's just someone who got lost in the storm, I muttered to myself, recalling the fierce blizzard that had swept through our town the night before. But the storm had passed hours ago, leaving behind a blanket of snow and a sense of eerie calm. Gathering my courage, I glanced towards the living room where the sound seemed to originate. My cat, Whiskers, was curled up on the couch, eyes half closed, seemingly unaware of the disturbance. I approached the window, pulling back the curtain to peer outside. The street was deserted, the heavy snowfall muffling any sounds from beyond the glass. No one was there, no car, no person, just the swirling snowflakes and the stillness of the night. Confusion gnawed at me. Who could be knocking at this hour? I wondered aloud, taking another step closer to the window. That's when I saw it. A faint handprint on the glass, as if someone had pressed their palm against the window and then pulled away, leaving behind a ghostly imprint. My breath caught in my throat, the realization dawning on me that whatever or whoever it was, wasn't a mere passerby. Panic surged through me as I turned away from the window, my mind racing to comprehend the situation. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling as I felt the cold metal under my palm. The knocking had subsided for a moment, giving me a brief respite to collect my thoughts. "Okay, stay calm," I told myself, attempting to summon the rationality that had always been my shield against fear. But just as I was about to open the door, the knocking resumed, louder and more aggressive than before. The handprint on the window seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and I could swear I saw a shadowy figure briefly appear beside it before vanishing into the night. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached out to unlock the door, the gravity of the situation settling over me like a suffocating blanket. As the door creaked open, I was greeted by an icy gust of wind that seemed to carry whispers of anguish and despair. The hallway was dimly lit, the shadows dancing menacingly across the walls. I took a cautious step forward, the cold air nipping at my skin, and peered into the empty foyer. No one was there, no sign of the figure that had been knocking so relentlessly. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Maybe it was just the wind, I muttered, though my voice lacked conviction, determined to put an end to the ordeal. I reached for the light switch, but as I flicked it on, the room remained shrouded in darkness. Confusion and fear mingled within me as I realized the lights weren't responding. In a frantic attempt to restore power, I moved towards the breaker box in the basement, my mind racing with thoughts of what or who I might be dealing with. The knocking had stopped again, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. I fumbled with the door, pulling myself down the stairs into the basement, the only light coming from the weak beam of my flashlight. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick with the scent of mold and mildew. As I approached the breaker box, a sudden chill swept through the room, and the flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I reached out, flipping the switches in an attempt to restore power, but the lights remained stubbornly off. My hands shook as I tried to steady myself, the fear threatening to paralyze me. Just as I was about to give up, the sound of footsteps echoed from the top of the stairs. My heart raced as I froze, the flashlight beam darting towards the sound. There, at the top of the stairs, stood a figure cloaked in darkness, its presence exuding an aura of malevolence that sent shivers down my spine. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice quivering with a mix of fear and defiance. The figure remained silent, its eyes hidden beneath the shadows of its hood. I took a step closer, the flashlight revealing a pale, gaunt face with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into my very soul. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Before I could receive an answer, the figure reached out a hand, its touch sending a jolt of cold through my body. The basement seemed to spin, the walls closing in as the room darkened further. I stumbled back, my mind racing to comprehend the supernatural occurrence unfolding before me. In a desperate attempt to escape, I turned and ran down the stairs, the sound of footsteps echoing behind me like a relentless pursuit. The basement door slammed shut, plunging me into darkness once more, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon filtering through the small basement window. I fumbled for my phone, using it as a makeshift flashlight, and tried to calm my racing heart. Just as I began to think I had escaped, the door to the basement creaked open, revealing the shadowy figure standing in the doorway once again. Its eyes, now visible in the dim light, held a sorrowful yet haunting emptiness that sent chills down my spine. "I see you," it whispered, the words dripping with an otherworldly sorrow. "I've been waiting." Fear clawed at me as I realized that whatever this entity was, it wasn't just a figment of my imagination or a trick of the storm. It was something far more sinister, something that had a purpose, a reason for haunting me in the dead of night. I backed away slowly, my mind racing to find a way out of this nightmare. "Please, leave me alone," pleaded, my voice trembling with fear. The figure took a step forward, its presence overwhelming, the coldness surrounding it intensifying. "You can't escape," it murmured, the voice echoing through the basement like a mournful lament. "I see you every night, watching, waiting." Desperation surged through me as I realized there was no way out, no way to banish this malevolent presence that had latched onto me in my time of solitude. The basement seemed to close in on me, the walls pulsating with an eerie energy that made the air thick and suffocating. Just when I thought all hope was lost, the sound of the front door slamming shut reverberated through the house, startling both me and the shadowy figure. The basement door swung shut once more, the sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the house as my parents returned from their late-night shopping trip, unaware of the terror that had unfolded in their absence. The figure vanished instantly, leaving me alone in the dark, the oppressive silence replaced by the normal sounds of a household awakening from the storm's fury. I collapsed onto the basement floor, my body trembling with fear and exhaustion, the memory of the shadowy figure and its haunting presence etched into my mind. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Even when I was alone in the house, the knocking returned sporadically, each time more intense and accompanied by the same handprint that had first alerted me to the presence outside. Despite my attempts to rationalize the occurrences, the fear remained, a constant reminder of the night when the shadows came to life and whispered my darkest fears. I delved into the history of my home, uncovering a tragic story that explained the supernatural events. Years ago, the previous owner had suffered a devastating loss during a harsh winter, the same time of year that now mirrored my own experience. Her grief had consumed her, leading to her untimely death in that very house. It was said that her restless spirit lingered, unable to move on from the pain and sorrow that had taken her life. Understanding the connection between her tragic past and the haunting I was experiencing provided a semblance of closure. But it couldn't erase the fear that lingered. I decided to honor her memory, performing a small ritual of remembrance to help her find peace and free her spirit from its eternal torment. On a quiet evening, I lit candles around the house, creating a circle of light and warmth against the encroaching darkness. I spoke words of comfort and understanding, acknowledging her pain and offering forgiveness for whatever wrong had been done. As I completed the ritual, the oppressive presence seemed to lift, the air growing warmer and the shadows retreating. For the first time in weeks, the house felt peaceful, the constant fear subsiding into a sense of calm. The knocking ceased, and the handprints no longer appeared on the windows. It was as if the spirit had finally found the closure it had been seeking, its lingering sorrow now at rest. Years have passed since that harrowing night, but the memory remains, a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. Sometimes, when the wind howls just right and the snow begins to fall, I catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure in the corner of my eye, a silent reminder that some spirits never truly rest, and some knocks are meant to be heard. If you ever find yourself alone in your home on a cold winter night, remember my story. Respect the memories that linger in forgotten corners. Honor the spirits that seek peace, and heed the whispers that echo through the shadows. For in the heart of the storm, not all knocks are mere coincidences, and some echoes of the past are waiting to be heard by those who dare to listen. Stay safe, cherish your loved ones, and may your nights be filled with warmth, love, and the enduring spirit of peace. Story number 5. The shadow behind the curtain. I still remember the night vividly, as if the chill of that December evening had seeped into my very bones. It was one of those long winter nights in our small town of Maplewood, where the snow lay thick and untouched, turning our quiet neighborhood into a serene, if somewhat eerie, winter wonderland. My parents had gone out to the grocery store, leaving me alone in our old, creaky house. At 12 years old, I was used to being on my own, but something about that night felt different, ominous, almost foreboding. I settled into the living room, the flickering light of the television casting dancing shadows across the walls. The movie was a horror flick, ironically amplifying the unease that gnawed at me. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and making the curtains sway like ghostly apparitions. I tried to focus on the screen, but my mind kept wandering, thoughts of the storm outside intertwining with the sinister scenes on TV. Halfway through the movie, a sudden movement caught my eye. Behind the large, heavy curtains that hung by the bay window, I saw a shadowy figure standing still, almost blending into the darkness. My heart skipped a beat. I squinted, trying to make out any details, but the figure remained indistinct, his presence more unsettling than comforting. My first thought was that my parents had come home early, deciding to surprise me. I shook my head, trying to dispel the irrational fear creeping up my spine. "Mom? Dad?" I called out softly, hoping for a reassuring response. Silence. The only sound was the relentless roar of the wind and the faint dialogue from the movie. I took a deep breath, convincing myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, perhaps influenced by the horror film I was watching. But the unease lingered, a persistent shadow in the back of my mind. deciding to check. I got up and walked towards the window, the soft snow crunching under my slippers. I pulled back the curtain, half expecting to see my parents standing there with smiles and warm greetings. Instead, the window was empty, the outside world obscured by the swirling snowstorm. Confusion washed over me. Maybe it was a trick of the light, I murmured, returning to the couch. As I settled back into my seat, the lights flickered momentarily, casting the room into brief darkness before stabilizing. That's when I noticed something else. A small piece of paper lying on the floor beneath the window. I picked it up, feeling a chill run down my spine as I unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, almost too precise, and the words sent a shiver through me. I see you. My mind raced, trying to process the meaning behind the cryptic message. I glanced back at the window, expecting to see the shadowy figure once more. But the room was empty. No sign of anyone. No movement. Nothing to suggest that someone had been there. The realization that I was alone intensified the fear, leaving me feeling vulnerable and exposed. I placed the note on the coffee table, trying to rationalize the situation. Perhaps it was a prank from a friend, or someone who had access to the house. But who would want to scare me, especially on a night when I was already feeling uneasy? The storm outside seemed to press in on me, the walls of the old house amplifying every creak and groan. Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, I decided to take another look around the house. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and began a slow, methodical search of each room. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing familiar furniture and decor, but nothing out of the ordinary, except for the lingering sense of dread that hung in the air. As I moved through the hallway, the temperature seemed to drop further, my breath visible in the chilly air. I approached the staircase, the steps creaking under my weight, and ascended to the second floor. The hallway was dimly lit, the same heavy curtains covering the windows, the snowstorm still raging outside. In the master bedroom, I found the window closed and locked, the curtains hanging heavy and still. There was no sign of anyone, no evidence to suggest that the shadow had been anything more than a fleeting apparition. Frustration and fear mingled within me, leaving me restless and sleepless. I returned to the living room, the note still lying on the table, now covered in a thin layer of dust that had settled overnight. As I reached out to touch it, my phone buzzed on the coffee table, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from my friend, Jake, checking in on me. "Hey man, you all right? Haven't heard from you in a while." I hesitated before replying, the memory of the night's events making me reluctant to share. Finally, I typed back a brief response, assuring him that I was fine and that the house was just a bit cold. That night, the unease returned, the shadows in the room seeming to stretch and warp in the flickering light of the television. As I lay in bed, trying to drift off, the memory of the shadow and the cryptic note haunted my thoughts. The storm outside had died down, the wind now a distant whisper, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Just as I began to relax, a soft noise broke the silence, a faint tapping sound, like fingernails drumming on glass. My eyes snapped open, and I glanced towards the window. To my horror, the same shadowy figure stood outside, its outline more distinct against the snowy backdrop. My heart raced as I stared in disbelief, the figure remaining motionless, his presence a silent threat. "Mom? Dad?" I called out again, my voice trembling with fear. No response came, only the stillness of the snow-covered night. I mustered the courage to get out of bed and approached the window once more, my hands shaking as I pulled back the curtains. The figure was still there, unchanging, its eyes seemingly locked onto mine. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin, the sense of being watched intensifying with each passing second. Desperate for answers, I grabbed my phone and dialed Jake, my fingers trembling as I waited for him to pick up. "Hey, Jake." "Yeah. I'm fine, just a bit cold here." There was a brief pause before he responded. "Are you sure? You sounded off earlier." I hesitated, then decided to share what had happened. I saw a shadow behind the curtain last night. Thought it was my parents. But there was no one there. Found a note that said, I see you. And now, I keep seeing this figure outside my window. It's freaking me out. There was a moment of silence before Jake spoke again. His tone more serious. Man, maybe you should call the police. It sounds like someone might be stalking you. Fear surged through me at the thought. No, I don't think it's a person. It was just a shadow. And that note. I don't know what to do. Jake sighed. All right, but stay safe. Let me know if anything changes. I ended the call, the weight of his words pressing down on me. The figure outside the window seemed to sense my distress, his presence growing more oppressive. I could feel the cold emanating from it, a tangible force that made my skin crawl. As midnight approached once again, I decided to take a proactive step. I called a local electrician friend, hoping to distract myself by helping him with a project. Anything to keep my mind off the haunting presence in my home. Hey, Mike, it's Eli. Yeah. I could use some help with some wiring issues. Are you free tonight? He agreed to come over the next morning, and I breathed a sigh of relief, feeling slightly more secure knowing someone else would be in the house with me. That night, as I lay in bed, the room silent except for the distant sounds of the city, the shadowy figure appeared once more. This time, it moved, gliding slowly across the room, its eyes never leaving mine. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched in horror, the realization dawning on me that whatever it wasn't human. The tapping at the window began again, louder and more insistent, as if the figure was trying to break through the glass to get closer. I grabbed my phone, ready to call Jake or the police, but my hand froze, the fear too overwhelming to move. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness as the power went out, the only light coming from the eerie glow of the figure's eyes. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged in the oppressive silence. The figure moved closer, his presence suffocating, the coldness enveloping me like a frozen blanket. I see you, it whispered, the words echoing in my mind like a relentless mantra. I always see you. Panic surged through me, and I bolted upright, scrambling out of bed and racing towards the window. But as I reached for the curtain, a force pulled me back, pinning me against the wall. The figure loomed over me, its hollow eyes burning with an unholy light. No! I screamed, trying to fight against the invisible grip that held me captive. The figure extended a hand, its touch cold as ice, and I felt a surge of despair wash over me. You shouldn't have looked, it whispered, the voice hollow and devoid of emotion. Now you belong to me. With a final, terrifying surge of fear, I snapped out of the paralysis, throwing the curtain open and lunging towards the door. The wind howled outside, the snow swirling in a frenzied dance. But I was focused solely on escaping the malevolent presence that sought to claim me. I ran down the hallway, my heart pounding, the shadowy figure relentlessly pursuing me, its laughter echoing through the empty rooms. The house seemed to stretch endlessly, the layout distorting as if the building itself was alive and intent on trapping me within its walls. Just as I reached the front door, it swung shut with a violent force, the lock clicking into place as the figure blocked my path. I was trapped, the weight of its presence pressing down on me, suffocating me with fear. Desperate, I turned back to face it, tears streaming down my face. Please, let me go, I begged, my voice barely a whisper. The figure smiled, a chilling gesture that sent shivers down my spine. It's too late, it intoned. I see you now, Eli, forever. As the realization hit me, the room began to spin, the walls closing in as the figure's grip tightened. The coldness consumed me, pulling me into a void of darkness and despair. My screams lost in the silence of the storm outside. I woke up the next morning in my bed, the sun streaming through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room. Disoriented, I looked around, everything appearing normal, as if the nightmare had been nothing more than a vivid hallucination. The note lay on the coffee table, still there as a grim reminder of the night's terror. Shaken, I called Jake and explained what had happened. He listened sympathetically, urging me to stay calm and suggesting that I seek professional help to deal with the overwhelming fear. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that night lingered, a haunting shadow that refused to fade. I tried to move on, focusing on my studies and daily routines, but the fear never truly left me. Every creak of the house, every flicker of the lights, sent my heart racing, the memory of the shadowy figure always lurking in the back of my mind. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, trying to distract myself with a movie, the feeling of being watched returned with a vengeance. The room grew cold, my breath visible in the frigid air, and the sense of dread overwhelmed me once more. The television screen flickered, and I saw it, the shadowy figure standing behind me, its eyes burning with an unholy light. I spun around, expecting to see the empty room, but the figure was there, its presence more terrifying than ever. "I see you," it whispered, the words echoing in my mind. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and called Jake, desperate for help. "Jake, it's happening again. Please, I need you." He promised to come over immediately, and I hurried to lock all the doors and windows, hoping to protect myself from the malevolent presence that sought to claim me. The minutes felt like hours as I waited, the silence of the house pressing in on me. Finally, Jake arrived, his expression serious as he listened to my account. "We need to leave," he said firmly. "Now." We packed up quickly, the fear driving us forward with an urgency that left no room for hesitation. As we drove away from the house, the storm finally began to abate, the snow slowing to a gentle fall, and the oppressive presence seemed to lift as we put distance between us and the haunted house. But even as we left, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadowy figure was still watching us, a silent guardian ensuring that I would never forget the terror I had endured. The note remained with me, a chilling reminder of the night when the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred, and a malevolent presence claimed me as its own. Years have passed since that fateful December night, but the memory remains, a ghostly echo that haunts my dreams and shadows my waking hours. Sometimes, when the winter winds howl just right and the snow begins to fall, I catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure in my peripheral vision, a silent reminder that some spirits never truly rest, and some shadows linger long after the storm has passed. If you ever find yourself alone in your home on a cold winter night, remember my story. Respect the boundaries between the living and the dead. Honor the memories that linger in forgotten corners, and heed the warnings whispered by the wind. For in the heart of the storm, not all shadows are meant to fade, and some spirits watch and wait, forever seeking to be seen. Stay safe, cherish those around you, and may your nights be free from the shadows that watch from the corners of your vision. Story number 6. The Ghost in the Screen. I still remember that night with the sharp clarity of a sudden chill. It was mid-December, and the snow had begun to blanket the world outside my small apartment in Boston. As a graduate student, my life revolved around late-night study sessions, endless cups of coffee, and the relentless hum of my aging laptop. That night, I was buried in research for my thesis, the only light emanating from my computer screen casting long shadows across the cluttered desk. The apartment was silent, save for the occasional creak of the old building settling and the distant sound of traffic muffled by the thick layers of snow. I had always loved the isolation it provided, time to think, to delve deep into my work without interruption. But that night, a sense of unease crept over me, something intangible yet profoundly unsettling. As the clock struck 2 a.m., fatigue began to weigh heavily on my eyelids. I rubbed my eyes, trying to stave off the encroaching drowsiness, when something caught my attention, on the corner of my screen. Amidst the open research papers and scattered notes, a shadow moved. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, perhaps a fleeting reflection from the street lamp outside. But the movement was too deliberate, too human. I leaned closer, Squinting at the screen, there, clearly visible in the reflection, was the silhouette of a man. He glided across the room behind me, his figure dark and indistinct against the brightness of the monitor. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared, unable to tear my gaze away. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes again, he was gone. My room was empty, the only thing out of place the window that swung open slightly, cold air swirling in and out despite the fact that I had locked it firmly just minutes before. Panic set in. I sat up abruptly, my chair scraping against the wooden floor, echoing in the stillness. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. The apartment remained silent, the only sound the faint rustle of the curtains dancing in the draft. I glanced back at the screen, half expecting to see him again, but it was just me, hunched over my work, trying to rationalize what I had seen. I convinced myself it was merely a hallucination, a side effect of stress and lack of sleep. Yet, the window had been locked, and there was no logical explanation for the moving shadow. My mind raced, searching for any clue, any hint of what could have caused the apparition. I decided to investigate, rising slowly and stretching my cramped muscles. The room felt colder now, the air thick with an unspoken tension. I walked over to the window, pulling the curtains aside to peer into the night. The snow was falling heavily, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The street was deserted, the silence oppressive, as if the world had paused in anticipation of something ominous. Turning back to my desk, I noticed something else, a faint imprint on the wooden floor near my chair, as if someone had dragged something heavy across it. My heart sank as I realized the footprints were small, resembling those of a child, but deeper and more deliberate, leading towards the window. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered to myself, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Determined to find answers, I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and shone it around the room, the beam cutting through the darkness. My eyes darted to the window again, where the snow had piled up higher, covering any traces of movement. Just as I was about to dismiss it as my imagination again, the screen flickered, the image distorting before stabilizing to show the same shadowy figure standing at the edge of my desk. This time, his eyes, if they could be called that, seemed to bore into mine, hollow and void of life. I stumbled back, my mind screaming to shut down the computer, to escape the room, but my legs felt like lead. The temperature plummeted further, my breath now visible in the icy air. "Leave me alone," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. The figure didn't move, his presence filling the room with a suffocating dread. Summoning every ounce of courage, I reached for the power button, my fingers trembling. As I pressed it, the screen went black, plunging the room into darkness. The silence was immediate and complete, the only sound my ragged breathing and the storm outside. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my racing heart, but a sudden gust of wind slammed the window shut, the sound reverberating through the room like a death knell. In that moment, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, light and deliberate, moving across the floor above me. My mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The man in the screen, the footprints, the open window, it was all connected. He was here, in my apartment, manifesting through the technology one relied on so heavily. I backed away from the desk, my eyes darting to the staircase leading to the second floor. The footsteps grew louder, more persistent, as if he were closing in on me. My instincts screamed to run, to flee the place that had become my own personal hell. But my body refused to comply. I was paralyzed by fear, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. Desperate, I grabbed the flashlight and made my way towards the stairs, the beam shaking in my grip. As I ascended, the air grew colder, the footsteps echoing louder with each step. The second floor was dimly lit, the hallway stretching out before me, adorned with framed photographs of previous tenants. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls, taunting me with their movement. At the end of the hallway, I saw it, a door ajar, the source of the footsteps. My heart raced as I approached, the fear intensifying with each step. Pushing the door open, I found myself in a small bedroom, the window wide open, the curtains billowing in the cold wind. The bed was neatly made, the only sign of disturbance being the same four-toed footprints leading from the window to the corner of the room. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. The temperature dropped further, my breath misting in the air as I fumbled for the light switch. The room remained dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside, casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. I felt a presence behind me, a chill that gnawed at my very soul. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. No response came, just the sound of my own racing heartbeat. Then, slowly, the figure from the screen materialized in the room, his form solidifying into a man dressed in outdated clothing, his eyes empty and soulless. He reached out a hand, his fingers cold and clammy, the touch of his presence sending shivers down my spine. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, his voice hollow and echoing off the walls. I stumbled back, my mind racing to comprehend the impossible reality before me. "What do you want?" I cried, tears streaming down my face. The man didn't answer. Instead, he began to move towards me, his footsteps silent yet heavy with intent. I backed away, desperate to escape, but the room seemed to close in on me, the walls narrowing, the air thick with his malevolent presence, summoning every ounce of strength. I ran towards the window, throwing it open and feeling the rush of cold air as I leapt out into the stormy night. The snow swirled around me, the wind howling like a banshee, as I scrambled to my feet and fled down the icy path towards the street. My heart pounded in my chest, the memory of his empty eyes haunting me as I ran for my life. I didn't stop until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys in the freezing cold. As I started the engine and sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him standing in the snow-covered yard, watching me with his empty eyes. But there was nothing, just the relentless storm and the fading echoes of my own terrified breaths. Driving through the night, the apartment receding into the distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, a lingering presence that would forever haunt my dreams. The experience left me shaken, a stark reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown, and the dangers that lie just beyond the glow of our screens. In the weeks that followed, I sought solace in friends and therapy, trying to piece together what had happened. Was it a ghost? A manifestation of my deepest fears? I couldn't find any logical explanation, the lines between reality and nightmare blurred by the terror of that night. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I decided to confront my fear head-on. I turned on my computer, the screen glowing softly in the dim light, determined to reclaim my space. I navigated to a video conferencing platform, inviting a friend to join me for a virtual chat. As we spoke, the conversation flowed naturally, the comfort of connection easing the lingering fear. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, the same shadowy figure gliding behind me, reflected on the screen. My blood ran cold as I turned to face him, only to find the room empty once more. The window, however, remained wide open, the curtains billowing in the cold wind, just as they had been that night. The footprints were gone, replaced by untouched snow, but the presence was unmistakable. He was still there, a silent sentinel lurking in the shadows, his empty eyes watching my every move. I tried to speak, to ask him why he was here, but no words came out. Instead, he began to move towards me, his form solidifying once again, the air growing colder with each step. "Leave," he whispered, his voice a chilling echo that resonated through the room. I grabbed the power cord, pulling the computer shut, cutting off the connection and the haunting presence. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting as he faded into nothingness. Trembling, I sat back down, the reality of what had happened sinking in. I knew then that some boundaries should never be crossed. Some shadows best left undisturbed. From that night on, I never looked at my computer screen the same way again. The fear of encountering him again lingered, a constant reminder of the unseen forces that watch and wait. Just beyond the reflection, I changed my habits, ensuring every window was double-locked and my computer kept away from mirrors and reflective surfaces. But the memory of his hollow eyes and the terror of his presence remained, a haunting echo that would forever shape my perception of the world around me. Years have passed since that fateful night, but the experience left an indelible mark on my soul. Sometimes, when the winter winds howl and the snow begins to fall, I catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow that disappears as quickly as it appears, leaving behind only the lingering fear and the haunting memory of the ghost in the screen. If you ever find yourself alone with your computer at night, remember my story. Respect the boundaries between the living and the dead. Honor the spirits that linger in the shadows. And beware the reflections that may hold more than just your image. For in the silence of the night, not all figures are mere illusions, and some ghosts are forever bound to the screens that illuminate our darkest hours. Stay safe, cherish the warmth of companionship, and may your nights be free from the shadows that watch from the corners of your vision. Story number 7. Footsteps in the attic. I still remember the night vividly. The way the shadows danced on the walls and the chill that seemed to seep into every corner of our old house. It was late October, and Halloween was just around the corner, bringing with it an unsettling mix of excitement and unease. Our house, a 2-story Victorian relic nestled in the quiet suburbs of Maine, had always held a certain charm, but lately, felt like something was off. I had moved in with my sister, Emily, just a few months earlier. After our parents passed away, the house had been empty for years, gathering dust and memories that seemed to linger in the air. Emily, always the pragmatic one, saw it as an opportunity to start fresh, while I, with my love for the supernatural, couldn't help but feel a strange connection to the place. That particular evening, Emily and I were winding down after a long day. The sky outside was a deep shade of navy, the last remnants of daylight fading as the sun set behind the dense forest that bordered our property. We sat in the living room, the fireplace crackling softly, casting a warm glow that contrasted sharply with the creeping darkness outside. "Do you ever feel like we're not really alone here?" I asked, staring into the flames. Emily chuckled, shaking her head. "It's just an old house, Eli. We're probably the only ones around for miles." I nodded, but my unease persisted. The house had a history, or so Emily had told me. Previous tenants had left abruptly, some never to be heard from again. Stories of strange noises, unexplained cold spots, and fleeting shadows had become our nightly conversation topics. But tonight felt different. There was a palpable tension in the air, a sense that something was about to unfold. As the clock struck midnight, the house settled into an almost eerie silence. The wind outside picked up, causing the trees to sway and the windows to rattle slightly. I tried to dismiss the feeling, attributing it to overactive imagination and the isolation of our new home. But then, I heard it, a soft, deliberate sound that seemed to originate from above. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. Emily looked up from her book, eyes narrowing. "Hear what?" Footsteps, not the random creaks and groans of an old house settling, but clear, measured steps ascending the staircase leading to the attic. My blood ran cold. The attic had been locked ever since we moved in, the door sealed shut with old paint and stubborn hinges that refused to budge. "Maybe it's just the wind," Emily suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. "These old houses make weird noises." I nodded slowly, trying to convince myself she was right. But the footsteps continued, growing louder and more distinct, echoing through the house like the deliberate march of someone with a purpose. Gathering every ounce of courage, I stood up and approached the attic door. Emily watched me, concern etched on her face. Be careful. Eli. I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched the cold, rough surface of the door. Taking a deep breath, I pushed against the weight of years, finally managing to pry it open. The attic revealed itself in a dim, dusty space cluttered with forgotten furniture and cobweb-covered boxes. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering intermittently, casting long, wavering shadows across the room. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The room remained silent, the footsteps having ceased as abruptly as they had begun. I stepped inside, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the darkness. My heart raced as I scanned the room, searching for any sign of movement, and then I saw it, a pair of old, worn shoes placed deliberately in the center of the attic floor. They were small, almost child-sized, with scuffed soles and frayed laces. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the sight. "Emily," I whispered, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Look at these." She joined me, her eyes widening in shock as she took in the sight. "What the hell are those?" Before we could ponder further, the temperature in the attic dropped sharply, our breath visible in the frigid air despite the summer night outside. A gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the lone bulb and plunging us into darkness. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of our own ragged breathing. "Let's get out of here," Emily urged, her voice shaking. I turned to leave, but as we approached the door, the floor beneath us began to tremble. The shoes at the center of the room started to move, sliding across the floor with an unnatural grace. Our eyes followed their path, frozen in terror as they led to a corner of the attic where a forgotten mirror leaned against the wall. In the mirror's reflection, we saw a figure, an indistinct shadow that seemed to merge with the darkness. The temperature plummeted further, and the room filled with an oppressive weight that pressed down on us, making it difficult to breathe. "Who are you?" I called out again, my voice cracking under the strain of fear. The shadow in the mirror began to take form, morphing into the unmistakable outline of a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothing. Her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow, she reached out a hand, her fingers stretching towards us as if seeking help or forgiveness. "We didn't do anything," Emily whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. The woman let out a soft, mournful sigh, her form wavering like mist in the wind. "Leave this place. Forget what you've seen." The shoes continued their slow, deliberate movement towards the mirror, disappearing into its depths as the woman's figure began to fade. The room's oppressive coldness lifted slightly, and the flickering bulb returned, casting the attic in an eerie, flickering light. We didn't waste a second. Grabbing each other's hands, we fled the attic, slamming the door shut behind us. The footsteps had returned, louder and more frantic this time, pounding against the floor like a relentless drumbeat. We ran down the stairs, down the hall, and out of the house, not daring to look back until we reached the safety of our car parked in the driveway. The storm outside had intensified, the wind howling and the snow piling higher against the windows, trapping us inside with the lingering fear of what we had encountered. As we drove away, the house stood silent and foreboding behind us, its windows reflecting the storm's fury. I couldn't shake the image of the sorrowful woman and the child-sized shoes, the memory etched into my mind like a ghostly imprint. The following morning, exhausted and still shaken, we returned to the attic to investigate further. The shoes were gone, leaving no trace of their presence, but the air still held a lingering chill. We decided to seek out the truth, delving into the house's history and uncovering the dark secrets it held. We learned that years before, the house had been home to a single mother and her young daughter. They had moved into the attic shortly after a tragic accident claimed the lives of their husband and father, leaving them alone in the vast, empty space. The mother, overwhelmed by grief, became increasingly withdrawn, her mental state deteriorating as she struggled to cope with their loss. One Christmas night, consumed by despair, she vanished without a trace. leaving the daughter alone in the attic. The girl, barely old enough to remember her parents, was found years later, her life tragically cut short in the very spot where we had found the shoes. It was said that her spirit remained, bound to the attic by the sorrow and abandonment she felt in her final days. Realizing the depth of the haunting we had experienced, Emily and I decided to honor the girl's memory, hoping to provide the closure her spirit so desperately sought. We cleared out the attic, removing any remnants of her presence, and placed a small, decorated wreath on the mantel, a symbol of remembrance and peace. That night, as we sat together in the living room, the house felt warmer, the oppressive tension replaced by a serene calm. The wind outside had subsided, and the storm had passed, leaving behind a blanket of fresh, untouched snow. We shared a quiet moment, reflecting on the events that had unfolded, the fear that had brought us closer, and the compassion that had driven us to help a lost soul find peace. In the months that followed, the house no longer felt haunted. The strange noises ceased, the cold spots dissipated, and the atmosphere was once again filled with warmth and light. We continued to live there, our bond strengthened by the shared experience, always mindful of the delicate balance between the living and the dead. Years have passed since that fateful December night, but the memory remains, a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. Sometimes, when the wind howls just right or the snow falls gently against the windows, I catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure in the attic, watching over us with eyes that hold both sorrow and gratitude. If you ever find yourself alone in an old house, remember our story. Respect the memories that linger in forgotten corners. Honor the spirits that seek peace, and listen to the whispers that echo through the halls. For in the stillness of the night, not all noises are mere coincidences, and some footsteps carry the weight of untold stories waiting to be heard. Stay safe, cherish those around you, and may your homes be filled with love, warmth, and the enduring spirit of peace.